The 2010s was a very interesting time for Shah Rukh Khan. I mean, that was my time to grow up with his movies, and I loved some of them, but looking back, it felt like an identity crisis of a filmography. Luckily, I think there's finally an idea of his future in Bollywood because Jawan does exactly what I wanted by just making him a gritty and raw action star. On one hand, this does feel grand and epic on a story scale, similar to something like Om Shanti Om, but on the other hand, it feels like the epic action of something like more recently RRR. I'll talk more about this later, but through all of what this movie delivered, the one thought racing my mind is that only Shah Rukh Khan, the biggest star of all, could pull off such an anti-Indian government movie, because this film is progressive yet dark in a way that I never expected, and I think that's why it strikes such a deep chord in me. Of course, if you've seen or want to check out Jawan, let me know what you guys think about it in the comments down below. Both always getting more time. Let's get right into it. I just want to start off by saying this movie is so absolutely raw. Like, when I say raw, this movie is just, it just keeps on going. Whether it's the action, the story, the emotion, I think it just keeps on hitting on every single beat. More specifically though, I think because Shah Rukh Khan plays so many different characters and there's so many different stories going on at once, sometimes it can feel a little unfocused. But when it's not feeling super unfocused, you get that kind of through line of playing all of these different variations of a character, a father and a son, this cohesive story at the center that is there a little bit. That is really what shined through for me, especially that father-son story. I love when an actor plays an older and younger version of themselves, and this one does it perfectly. For me, a 3-hour movie is only worth it when you feel that epic scale. Oppenheimer, Babylon, and now Jawan, you feel that scale, you feel that time, you feel it passing on an epic nature. I will say though, what the older version of this character really taught me is that Bollywood needs to take advantage of Shah Rukh Khan looking older, grittier, darker. Because going into this movie, I didn't know anything about the story. I thought Shah Rukh Khan was gonna look how he looked in the trailers for like 90% of this film, but it turns out they still do the old trick of just trying to make him look young. I don't like that. Like, keep him gritty, let him do his thing. He is a visceral action star. Let him do what he does best. Obviously, I get the ideal nature of having him play a young star, a young action hero, and then obviously you have a young action heroine as well. I get that aspect of it, but I think as he gets older, the roles that he's gonna perform in and just be more badass in are those older character roles. But I also get Bollywood, business-wise, you can't really do that. But speaking of Bollywood-wise, I think what's so interesting about this movie is how anti-Indian government it is.
अपनी जान 1000 बार दांव पर लगा सकते हैं, लेकिन सिर्फ देश के लिए। तुम्हारे जैसे देश बेचने वालों के लिए हरगिज़ नहीं। So Kali, no deal.
I talked about this in the intro a little bit, but this movie is basically about the rich versus the poor. But again, the one thought that's been on my mind since I walked out of the theater for this movie is that only the biggest action Bollywood star could make an anti-Indian government movie. I mean, here they're just tearing it down piece by piece. It's also very heavy on the women empowerment aspect, and you normally don't get that when you have the big action star in the lead. You don't get anything else, but here it's ingrained into this story. It's so rich with detail and purpose, and I think sometimes, yes, it is at its fault because it makes it a little bit unfocused because there's just so much going on. But when it works and when they are on the nose about this anti-Indian government thing, that's when this movie really does work for me. The way I like to put it is my Indian grandpa would not like this movie, but I think that's why I like it so much. I like how progressive it is, I like how much it works, and I like how deep all of the lore really cuts for each one of the characters. Again, makes it slightly unfocused, but each sequence feels unique. Each sequence feels very dark. It feels visceral. I felt like a shaking within my body at the backstory of each one of the girls on the team. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about, but between every sequence, there is this very raw and vulnerable moment that it feels like you just don't get anymore in Bollywood films. I know I'm gonna probably lose some credibility by making this comparison inherently because they're just Indian movies, but RRR also did this so well. Thematically, it's so similar to RRR in the sense of it just intertwines these absolutely devastating things throughout the film, but it really deepens the characters and it makes them never really feel one note, in my opinion. Again, it's a very long movie, but it feels all worth it to me because you get these deeper moments between all the characters. I'm gonna talk about the father-son stuff in just a second, but I think that the moment that the interval happened and that big character reveal, the character comes back, blah, 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 I don't want to spoil it. But that moment, I was so out of my, I was like, I was shaking with emotion. I was so invested into this movie, and I was like, holy we're only halfway through. And then obviously after that, we get more lore, we get more backstory. It's literally a 15 to 20 minute chunk of the movie that's dedicated to backstory. But again, it adds so much. It's so grand, it's so epic. Again, it follows in that like slight storytelling aspect of what RRR did with Interval, and then you kind of get a flashback. I don't know, I can't reiterate how massive this movie feels. Like I can't comprehend it. It's like the first time I watched RRR or Babylon or any 3-hour long epic movie. It's just there. I feel the scale, I feel the scope, I feel the size of it all. But story aside, obviously this is a massive action movie, and it feels that way exactly. Shah Rukh Khan had a movie that released earlier this year, and I enjoyed it more than most people, but I will say there was one action sequence that was good. It was the warehouse sequence, great filmmaking, but other than that, it kind of dilutes into this big blobby CGI mess. In this movie, though it does have a lot of CGI, most of the sequences that are action are all hand-to-hand combat. There's a singular car chase sequence, and yes, the CGI does look a little bit iffy on that one, but other than that, the 4, 5, 6 action sequences are all hand-to-hand combat, and they rip. The action is a blend of amateur hand-to-hand and just basically ballsy camera work, but also that mix of that Hollywood John Wick action. In my John Wick 4 review, I basically said that John Wick 4 feels like a culmination of 1 through 3 in that franchise, and every action movie innovation they made, it culminates in John Wick 4. And Jawan feels like a culmination of all of that. Before I get to the final thing, there's this one quote in the movie where one of the soldiers says he wasn't in the mood to die that day. That literally had me on the edge of my seat. But this movie is not only thematically prevalent, and yes, sometimes a little unfocused, but thematically prevalent, but it also takes that next step into just being a visceral, raw action film. Okay, the final thing I want to talk about is the music. I think the songs are fine. I think the sets are absolutely incredible though. And also the theme goes hard as fuck. It keeps on going. It's like this signal, like when you hear it, you're automatically triggered to be like, shit's going down. Anyways, that's pretty much all my thoughts on Jawan. I absolutely love this movie. This movie rips. It's awesome. Anyways, again, I love this movie. Please let me know what you guys think about this movie in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.